Coming up on this edition of Mic'd Up Sports, you know him as the Minnesota announcer guy who has taken his talents to nearly 500 events across the athletic spectrum. He is Brian Sweeney, and this is Mic'd Up Sports. Hello everyone, I'm Mike Peden and this is Mic'd Up Sports, the show that goes in depth with the people who build our sports community. Now you're wondering who would make for a good guest on this program, and that answer is anyone. Coaches, players, media members, and in the case of Brian Sweeney, announcers. Anyone who works in sports, we want to feature them on this program, and Brian, you certainly fit that bill. Thanks for stopping by.
Not a problem, Mike. Glad to help out.
So before you took up announcing, what was your background in sports, either as a player, parent, coach? What was your involvement?
When I was young, I did the T-ball and the 8-ball, did youth football and basketball, and got into middle school and kind of quit doing that and, did the drumline thing. And so then during the high school, I was at all the sporting events as part of the marching band and the drumline, whether it was the hockey games, the football games, things of that nature. When I had children of my own, they wanted to get involved into sports, and I thought what a great way to be involved with my children is to help coach. So when my son started soccer, I became a soccer coach and coached him for a number of years, up to and including my tenure with the Inver Grove Heights School District, where I coached the middle school soccer program for 6 seasons. When he went on to high school ball, I decided it was time to step away from coaching so that instead of being at my own event, I could be watching my son from the stands. And after a year of that, an opportunity opened up for the hockey program where their announcer was stepping down. And with my background and broadcasting degree, I thought, why not give it a try? And here we are getting ready to go into my 6th season with Simley's hockey program and everything else that I've done since then as well.
And the opportunities you've had to announce games have expanded exponentially since then. We'll talk a little more about that as we move along, but you mentioned you got a broadcasting degree. Where did you attend school?
I went locally in Minneapolis here, Brown Institute, which has turned out
that was my first guess.
so many people throughout the years. And I still communicate with a lot of those same people. A couple of the people from my graduating class went on to be the television play-by-play for the Minnesota Thunder and Stars for a number of years before they became the Minnesota United here most recently with the MLS. He and I graduated together. I have another graduate with me that does voiceover down in Iowa, another one that went and worked up at KQDS in Duluth. So we had a lot of success. I did a couple radio things after graduation and a few local stations in town here from more of a production and engineering standpoint, not a whole lot of on the air. And then once my children got a little bit older, that just kind of fell by the wayside until 2009 when I had an opportunity for my first official sports announcing.
How much experience did you have before you got into announcing professionally?
0.
Really
none.
This was more of a late coming or a late comer activity?
Yep, it really was. I mean, like I said, back in 2009, I was a mechanic at a Ford dealership, and our service manager and his son were big into watercross racing, which is snowmobile racing on open water in the summer. And it's not just straight across like many people would think. It's actually, there's buoys in the water and they're circling it and creating laps. And had an opportunity to announce that in Grantsburg, Wisconsin back in 2009. And I said, okay, this is interesting. I'm enjoying this. And then nothing really happened again until 2014 when I picked up that first full-time sports announcing gig.
And even if you didn't do a lot of announcing early on, with your background in sports, I imagine you watched a lot of sporting events. Were there any announcers, either on the broadcasting side or public address, anyone that you really
You know, I mean,
had a fondness
more
for?
recently, I've always admired Adam Abrams, who's the public address announcer for both the Minnesota Twins and the Minnesota Wild. I have a close business relationship with James Carroll, who for years was the Minnesota Vikings announcer. He's also mostly well known. Every year when you watch the State High School League hockey tournaments, they send it down to Jim for the introductions to the players, you know, so that's Jim that's doing that. And I actually owe a lot of my input to the college scene to Jim, just by word of mouth and through that business relationship that I've developed with him.
And when did you attend Brown for the broadcasting degree?
I graduated in '93 from Brown.
Okay, 93. So even though you hadn't been involved on the announcing side up until 2009 and then 5 years later, what were some tips or tricks that you recall from your education at Brown that helped you re-enter this world as seamlessly as you have?
I don't think there really was any tips or tricks as much as it was I just never shut up. And
and you figure might as well make use of it.
yeah, might as well make use of it. You go to sporting events, and I'd always be listening. You always are listening, much like a musician goes to a club and listens to the performers there, or an athlete, whether it's a football player or a hockey player, will go watch what they play and pick up, tips and tricks from the athletes on the field. I was doing the same thing. So even though I wasn't using it yet, I was kind of storing it in a mental log in the back of my head.
Now, you got your official start at Simley, or at least the start that launched this career. And then from Simley, you've expanded to Eastridge for their lacrosse, Concordia, St. Thomas hockey. I mean, you've got a wide swath of high school and small college sports in your repertoire. So how did the Simley opportunity, how did that job lead to the other announcing gigs you've picked up in the last 5 years?
Yeah, so I had finished my first season at Simley in 2015 there when the hockey season had ended. And I just that summer I decided, I'm going to contact all the colleges within a 100-mile radius. So I had recorded myself on my cell phone, just set the cell phone down in the box with me there at rinkside and recorded myself and had a resume and some samples and things that I sent out to, like I said, every college within about a 50 to 100-mile radius of the Twin Cities. That fall of 2016, I picked up one soccer game fill-in for St. Cloud State University. Happened to be a rainy night. I think there was maybe 5 people in the stands, so wasn't too worried about making any mistakes, for that. But then that spring, I received a email on a Wednesday afternoon from Kara Lloyd from the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers that they were hosting the WCHA Final Face-Off that weekend, and their full-time announcer had a conflict with the early game that Saturday. So she asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. Going back to James Carroll, he's the one that had given her my name. It happened to be boys high school tournament weekend, so that's why James couldn't do it. And that's also why their normal announcer couldn't do it, because he was going to be next door at Mariucci Arena announcing the consolation round for the boys high school tournament. So I got thrown into a game where I was able to announce the University of Wisconsin Badgers women's team against the University of Minnesota Duluth women's hockey team. So my first college, real college game, Division I, was a marquee matchup, so to speak. You've got multiple championships facing each other on the ice, and it was quite exciting. And it was at that point that I said, okay, I need to push myself into this a little bit further.
No pressure, right? Calling a D1 women's hockey game?
No, I only made one mistake. They give you the roster ahead of time, and usually you've got your wingers and your defense and your goalie, and they go straight across the top lines. Well, they decided to go for, this player down to this player, back up to this player. And of course, I read it across, which I'm used to doing. And, the cameraman's on the ice putting their face on this television screen as we're going across, and I said the wrong name.
And did you hear from that team afterward, or did
No, actually, as soon as right during the national anthem, the phone rang, and it was the upstairs asking me if I gave them the wrong information or if I was the one that made the error.
Okay, so they worked it out pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, it was instantaneous.
But it's interesting you bring that up because in high school you don't necessarily have that support system, so you've got to make sure you're on top of it because there aren't always camera ops or folks upstairs who can confirm.
No. I mean, it made it fun. It was definitely a learning experience. I learned to bring a highlighter with me and a flashlight, because I think the biggest part of that was the first event that I had ever had to do with starting introductions where the lights were down in the stadium, which makes it that much harder to read what you have in front of you, obviously.
And it's a little easier with phones. You can just flip your light on, but that's another interesting nuance with public address announcing. It's not something I have much experience in, so to hear these stories already is fascinating. What level of prep work goes into your job as an announcer? You've posted some photos with the Vixen or some of the other teams, and you've got sheets of paper. It's not just, you don't just show up and read names.
It all depends what sport it is and for what school or semi-professional team it is. With my work with the Minnesota Vixen, besides their public address announcer, I'm actually also responsible for everything that happens from the moment the gates open to the kickoff and then again at halftime. And by that I mean if there's going to be a color guard, I'm setting that up. If there's going to be halftime entertainment, I'm setting that up. If there's a national anthem singer, I've had flyovers that I've, rigged during national championship games, which those are fun to time out to make sure the plane gets there right as the anthem singer's in the correct part of the national anthem. So I do a lot more for the Vixen. So for that, my work actually starts in about November, December, even though the season doesn't start till April, so that I can get all that stuff ahead of time. I help write a lot of the advertiser copy for the Minnesota Vixen because they have a lot of advertisers to help pay. So those are all those things you hear in between plays, that visit this person for this or go here to purchase this. So a typical script then that I write for the Minnesota Vixen is about 16 pages long. And in there it tells when we're playing what music, when we're doing the coin toss, and everything's back time to that kickoff so that we know what time to be doing everything at. As far as high school sports go, for football, the script is much smaller. You have a sportsmanship creed that you read ahead of time. You have a national anthem. For Simley High School, for instance, they don't do an introduction of individual players. They introduce the team as a whole because it takes the team to win the game. Mm-hmm. For other schools, it's whatever they want. When I'm doing hockey, I make sure ahead of time that I go and I get the visiting team and the home team's goals per player for that season so far. And I've been told by many visiting teams that they don't get that when they go to other rinks. So when they come in, it's just a nice little touch when you can say, Johnny Thompson has scored his 4th goal of the season. Now the home team, they expect to hear something like that. In a way, parents to come into an arena and hear something like that, it means something to them. So I take every sport, whether it's high school baseball, football, soccer, lacrosse, and hockey, and I try to give it as much as I can to make it the equivalency of whatever that professional sport would be, whether it's Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NFL, the MLS, etc. Just because, in all honesty, 99.9% of those kids that I'm announcing at the high school level are not going to play at the professional level, let alone the college level.
And I take a similar approach. I know some of the sports directors I've worked with, they give me some flack because I refuse to be a homer, but like you said, for schools that I may not see all the time, or especially if they're coming from outside the metro, their parents are going to look for this, and to me, they deserve a professional broadcast, and those kids deserve to get the same recognition that the local teams do. And most of the sports directors, they understand, so they don't tell me, oh, you should cheer for this team more often, but how many announcers would take that into consideration at this level?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is, when you're on the payroll of a school, you want to have a little homerism in your call. You want to give it
and it's fun to see Simley. Right. It's fun if Simley, for example, if their football team is winning games.
Right.
Makes it a little more exciting for you, but continue what you were saying.
Yeah, and like when I'm doing, St. Thomas hockey, I bring a little of, and I go back to Adam Abrams, who's a an amazing hockey caller for the Minnesota Wild. He holds that Minnesota out before he says Wild, literally 10, 15 seconds sometimes. I'm never going to approach that, but when I'm calling St. Thomas onto the ice, I hold it for a little bit longer. I give them a little 5, 6, 7 second hold before I say Tommy's, just to give them that little bit of love, make the fans and the parents in attendance say, okay, we're at a real sporting event here. This isn't when my child played mini mites, or this isn't when they played junior varsity or any sort of club level sport. This is college, and in hockey, there's Division III and there's Division I. There is no Division II in hockey. So Division III really is good enough, in my opinion, to play against a lot of the Division I schools in this country. So they should be treated as a Division I program.
How long did it take for you to develop your public address announcer voice?
It's not so much a voice as it is a mindset. I just kind of put myself into the arena, and when that microphone goes on, that's just what comes out. It's not something that I sit at home and practice. I may read scripts at home. I may work on how to pronounce a name at home. My wife gets sick of hearing me say those things a lot of the times. But I don't really work on the voice. It's something that, with the radio show that I do now, I was just doing an air check last week, and I'm reminded, be Brian. Let Brian's talent come out. Let Brian come out. Don't try to be Casey Kasem. Don't try to be Adam Abrams. Don't try to be Jim Carroll. Don't try to be Mike. Just be who you are, and then let that come through.
And how many events do you announce per year with all the teams you're a part of?
Let's see. For football, you have, this will be my first season doing Concordia St. Paul men's football. So I'll have 6 games there. I'll have a minimum of 4 games at Simley for football. So and then I've got the Vixen season in the spring. So this year for the Vixen, we did our home games and our road games were all broadcast. So the home games, I did the public address announcing. On the road games, I did the color commentary. So I did a full season for the Vixen, not including the WFA championship weekend. So, for football, it's probably close to 20, 25 games a season. Hockey is my busy sport, which I'm glad, because hockey is my favorite to do. And hockey is typically between 60 and 70 games a winter. Soccer, I'm no longer doing high school soccer. I decided to step away from that and kind of give my wife a little more time with me at home in the fall before winter sets in. But I'm still doing the college soccer, so that's about 10 games or so. And then in the spring, lacrosse and baseball. So I'd say announcing-wise, just right around 100, 120.
So those vocal cords, I'm sure you've trained them to hold up under such intense pressure.
It's funny because I can, when I'm calling a hockey goal, there's a lot of love behind a hockey goal, or even a soccer goal for that matter, a lacrosse goal. And I've learned, much like a singer uses their diaphragm to breathe, I've learned to use different parts of my throat when I want to belt something out louder, and I can go right back to talking normal instantly afterwards without so much as a hesitation. So it's a training thing, as you've mentioned.
And certainly you've been training it well, if the body of work you have is any indication. You mentioned getting a wrong name in your first college hockey announcing assignment. Maybe what are some of the silliest or more embarrassing moments that you had involving public address announcing?
Well, there's the obvious where the microphone's accidentally left on. And you might say something afterwards.
And your entire conversation is broadcast to the audience?
Exactly, yep. That happens semi-frequently when I don't bring my own equipment. I use a lot of my own equipment. I'm a firm believer in getting up and close and personal with my microphone, and I don't want anything that I may be carrying or anything that somebody else may be carrying to transfer to me. I mean, as you stated, there's a lot of health involved in public address announcing. If you have laryngitis or if you have pneumonia or a cold, it's kind of hard to get behind a microphone and do something, especially, public address announcing. You're normally not in a climate-controlled facility unless you're announcing like a basketball or a wrestling match. If you're a public address announcer for swimming, there's a high humidity level. If you're doing hockey, it's dry, and then
cold.
And you get used to the cold. You can dress for the cold.
That's true. That's true.
But you start looking at football, soccer, lacrosse. I have yet to be in a high school press box that has a good climate control system. I've only been in one that had air conditioning, and that was in Iowa. So, but yeah, so I mean, you want to make sure that you have all that available. So with the microphone, I use a foot pedal from a microphone. Works much like somebody's riding lawnmower. If my foot's down on the pedal, the microphone's live. As soon as I take my foot off the pedal, the microphone goes dead. Well, those switches wear out after a while, and last year in the baseball season, I had a switch that stayed on more often than it should, and you could hear me over the public address system. So.
That's a fair ball, I bet, or something like that.
I will say this. Since I've moved to the press box, I am less judgmental of calls, and I enjoy the game more.
I felt the same way when I started my beat writing career with the Minnesota Lynx, and then I covered the college game. I do a lot of prep games. You just find it, even when I'm going as a fan, you cheer for your teams. If I go to a Wild or a Wolves, I'll still cheer for them, but you kind of understand the nuances and that, hey, the other team's working just as hard. So it's harder, like you said, to be judgmental, and I think that's a good thing because I don't think you get riled up as much. You can enjoy the game knowing that you don't have a whole lot of control over what happens.
And a lot of times, too, where we're sitting, whether it's on the ice at a hockey game or up in the press box at a soccer, football, lacrosse, you see it from a different vantage point than the parents necessarily see it. Not to mention you're paying more close attention. So you might see something and say, oh, that was a good no call, or that was the correct call, whereas the parent of that player that was either called against or for is already standing up and yelling at the ref, and you're like, no, they had that one correct. Either you don't know the rules or you looked after the play was over and saw that it was your child laying on the ground.
What are some of your most favorite moments as a public address announcer?
One of my most favorite is this past March, I had the opportunity to be the announcer for the Women's Division III National Championship hockey game. University of St. Thomas was hosting it, and typically I'm not their women's announcer, but when the playoffs started, they had asked me if I would be willing to announce the playoffs. Once they had the opportunity to announce the national championship, of course, I said, I get to do that, right? Not something you have a lot of chances in your life to do, is to announce a national championship for any sport. So, of course, I made sure I had the opportunity to do that. And the most exciting part of that to me was not the game, was not the number of fans in attendance, but when the game was over. And when you watch a sporting event on TV and all of a sudden you see the person handing out the national championship hats and t-shirts, getting to see that person on the ice, here's your hat, here's your t-shirt, and watching those women put those hats and t-shirts on, just knowing that that's how it happens. I mean, it was just something unique about that aspect of it. It had nothing to do with the sport. It was the whole afterwards, here they're getting what, the game is going to fade over time from their memories. The feeling of winning that game is going to subdue. However, that hat and that t-shirt that they got, they're going to always have that. That's going to go on a shelf in their home, and years from now they're going to say to their kid, see that hat up on that shelf there? Let me tell you about when Grandma won that, or let me tell you about when Mom won that. And that was actually kind of neat to see them come out and hand those out to those players.
Is there any difference between calling a postseason or championship game compared to a regular season game?
For postseason games, especially for something like that, even though for the semifinal game St. Thomas was in it, you have to be non-biased. You have to be neutral in your announcing. So up until that game, you could be a homer. You could give as much love as you wanted to St. Thomas. But as soon as that game started, you had to be equal to both teams. That is the biggest difference. But I found when I do the girls section 3AA high school championship every year, I kind of give a drawn back version of homerism equal to both teams. Give them both that extra love that they don't normally get throughout the season. And so, I mean, that's the biggest difference, is just the way you're saying what you're saying. You know, what's coming out of your mouth is the same, it's just the way it's coming out.
And you notice this a lot at the high school level, because a lot of the announcers, you know, they're either parents or local folks, you know, they're not professionals like you might see at Division I or the professional ranks. And I feel your approach helps folks like yourself stand out compared to the rest of the pack. You get some guys that it just seems like they're reading it off a script. They're just there for the extra money or for whatever reason. You know, you have this approach, this attitude of, why not make it fun? Why not, as you said earlier, bring a taste of that professional experience to the high school level? So what motivated you to bring that level of energy to high school games?
You know, I don't have an honest answer for that.
You just do.
I just wanted to do, I wanted to make it equally fun for myself. And when you're working 120 sporting events a year, you could get bored. I often tell people I don't hunt, I don't fish. This is my hobby. It's just a hobby that I'm fortunate enough that I can get some pay for and get to see some great young athletes. You know, so with that said, everybody wants their hobby to be fun. If you're a fisherman, you're going into it for the thrill of the catch. If you're people that do like those Ultimate Warrior type training courses, there's some fun in that for them to climb the walls and to leap over fire pits and stuff like that. So I wanted to bring it as much fun for myself as I was for those players and the spectators behind me.
What kind of response have you received from players and coaches who have witnessed your having fun approach?
You know, last season I was fortunate enough that after one of the boys' high school hockey games, the entire visiting team skated over and thanked me for what I had done, which had never happened before. So of course that evening I made sure on Twitter that I reached out to their athletic director and their head coach and let them know just how much that meant to me, that they were able to recognize that I did this not just for my team, but for them as well.
And you talk about getting a chance to see young athletes in their development. You know, maybe you might hear about them in college or the pros. Any moments on the field that stand out where you were glad you got the chance to witness it and, you know, call it, since that's what you do?
You know, I mean, it was kind of fun. I mean, last year I substituted for a couple University of Minnesota Golden Gopher hockey games, one men and two of the women's games. And for one of the women's games, it was the teddy bear toss, which I'm sure you've seen those on TV, the first goal, and here come all these teddy bears over my head and onto the ice and things like that. And just knowing that the student body that was in attendance there and the other fans that were in attendance there, and even the broadcasters for the play-by-play that were up top were throwing those bears down onto the ice. It was just neat because I knew where those were going, and I knew that those were going to help, you know, the children at the Masonic Hospital with their healing processes. So that was kind of a neat thing to be a part of. You know, it's also kind of neat. I look back, although I was not fortunate enough to announce him in baseball because it was prior to my announcing baseball, Michael Bush from Simley High School, who I announced in both football and hockey, was recently drafted by the Los Angeles Dodgers in the first round this year. So it's kind of neat to know that, okay, here's this young man that I knew when he was in high school, and I had the opportunity to announce him a couple years, and now he has an opportunity to go pro. And he's just been really fun to watch playing, you know, down for the Tar Heels as well. So it's kind of neat to look at him and look at what the Gophers do with the teddy bears and just kind of put it all into perspective that, you know, these people are not only doing this for themselves, which is in the case of Michael Bush and trying to further his career, but also for the people in their community like the Gophers did with the teddy bears.
So if Michael Bush becomes an ace for the Dodgers or wherever he ends up, you can say, I was there.
I still have his phone number, so.
Okay. And still on good terms then?
Oh yeah, he comes home for Christmas break every year and stuff from college, and I'll run into him at the ice rink because he still comes and talks to Coach Kreiser from Simley and, you know, hangs out at the rink and watches those kids, and, you know, once in a while he plays in like the alumni game and things like that, so.
I remember his name was mentioned frequently at his time at Simley, and it's great to see him take it to the next level. Who knows? Well, Kershaw can't stay there forever, right?
No, I mean, everybody has an opportunity, which is great.
And speaking of opportunities, as we mentioned earlier, you kind of reach out to the masses, as you said, reaching out to all these schools within a certain radius. How did you get the Concordia job, and then St. Thomas you talked about, and then Eastridge Girls Lacrosse? So, you are known as, I kind of thought of you as Mr. Simley for all this time, and then, hey, now you're calling a Woodbury school in Eastridge. It's a pretty interesting assortment of schools you've got.
Yeah, for a couple of years there, I was kind of known as the Ryan Seacrest of Inver Grove Heights, because he's kind of got his hand in everything. But no, I mean, the University of St. Thomas job came from when I reached out to all the colleges in the area and things. And then it'll be almost a year and a half ago now, I received a email from Josh Deere at Concordia St. Paul that they needed to fill in for one of their lacrosse games that spring in the Dome before they take the Dome down every spring. So I went and did that, and that worked out really well. And then he contacted me over the summer that the soccer job had opened up. And last year he had asked me to do football, and I was unavailable due to other commitments. And so then in the spring I got the lacrosse full time, and then now this fall I'll be doing the football full time. So a lot of it is luck. But I mean, there's other things besides luck. You mentioned the Eastridge. The head coach last year in 2018 for Eastridge's girls lacrosse was a player on the Simley boys hockey team that I had announced. So that's how he knew me. So I'm a firm believer in networking whenever possible. And so I will always network. My networking now has got me to where I am the number 2 person for Gopher men's and women's hockey this season. So once Jamie goes through the men's schedule and figures out what games he's not available to do, and once Rick Benson, they call him Benny, but Rick goes through the women's schedule and figures out what he's not able to do, then the Gophers will allow me to look at those schedules and see what games I can fill in for. So it just, never burn a bridge, network whenever you can, and don't be afraid to just talk to people, because that's what pretty much got me. I mean, I say Jim Carroll kind of got me into the college side of it, and with Jim Carroll, it was just, I knew who he was from watching the high school hockey tournament. I reached out to him on LinkedIn, and to this day, we've never met face to face, but we email, text, and talk quite often.
I've got a few of those pen pals in my career as well. How did you end up as the voice and director of entertainment for the Minnesota Vixen?
That's a good story. So in 2014, my oldest daughter and I were out at Canterbury Park because I can't remember the horse that year, was actually going for the Triple Crown. It had won the Preakness and it had won the Kentucky Derby, and so now it was time for Belmont, or unless Belmont and Preakness are switched around, but I guess that's irrelevant.
We know what
he won the first 2 of the 3 races, and the Minnesota Vixen that year were playing in Farmington High School, and a friend of mine was selling tickets for the game. He was friends with the owners. I had never even met the owners prior to that. And so my daughter and I left Canterbury after the horse lost the Triple Crown, went out to Farmington. We were watching the game, and I was listening to the announcer up in the booth, and I was introduced to the owners, James and Laura, and I actually said to Laura, I said, I could do better than this for you. And she called my bluff, and now after 5 seasons, I'm still there.
She called it, and then you raised it, right?
And then I raised it, yes.
And what I find fascinating about it, you tell me what you get out of it. I remember we did a game last year. I was calling it for Town Square. You were announcing it, and you said you get a steak dinner out of it, but...
Prime rib, actually.
Prime rib. Oh, that's why I'm glad I spoke with the source here. But for you, it's, again, bringing that energy into a team. It's a semi-pro. These women are paying to play. And for a team that's working to get the same level of recognition that the pro teams do. I have to imagine you're a well-known face among the Vixen community now.
Yeah, I mean, my work with the Minnesota Vixen has led to many other things. My work with the Minnesota Vixen has allowed me to network with coaches and media of other teams locally. It has allowed me to travel. I mean, I've been allowed to broadcast games in Des Moines, Milwaukee, Madison, St. Louis, Kansas City, Atlanta. Then this past month out in Golden, Colorado. So it's that part of it. So even though I'm not getting rich, which I'm not getting rich at any of the jobs, which anybody that's not an athlete will tell you is true. I'm getting rich, I'm getting rich inside. Some of the relationships that I've built with the players and the coaches, and now James and Laura, the owner, are mine and my wife's best friends. I mean, we do more with them than we do anybody else, all because, back in 2014, I said I could do better than what they had. It's allowed me the opportunity to develop my own script writing style for sporting events. It's allowed me to, reach out to advertisers and sponsors and pull those people in. It's allowed me to figure out how to coordinate those flyovers for national anthems. It's allowed me to reach out to young talent that might not otherwise have an opportunity to perform at a halftime for a sporting event, or otherwise might not have an opportunity to sing a national anthem in front of people. It's allowed me to reach out to them and allow them to do that. When I did the national championship for the women's hockey this past year, we actually had a girl at Simley High School who was a sophomore on the junior varsity hockey team who would come in and sing the national anthem before a lot of the boys' games, or sometimes before the girls' varsity games. So I reached out to her and I contacted the people at the NCAA ahead of time and said, hey, I have this person. Would it be okay if we invited her to sing the national anthem instead of playing something recorded? So I gave her then that opportunity to sing the national anthem in front of a national audience. So, it's those, I take what I'm getting and I kind of give it back tenfold, which makes me feel good.
And along the lines of networking with the Vixen the past couple of seasons, even though you don't work directly with each other, you've gotten a chance to get acquainted with the current voice of the Timberwolves in Sean Parker. As I remember, you told me you auditioned for the same job that Parker got, and now the two of you
Sean and I,
Vixen games.
Sean
and
and I
you
met
guys have
through
connected quite well.
We met through the audition process, and it was funny because he will tell everybody I'm his first friend that he had in Minnesota. And during the process, it was one of those things where I was at a game in Matamidi watching my son play soccer, and my little Facebook app said Sean Parker's in town. I'm like, he must be back for a second interview or something like that. So, Sean came when he came into the Twin Cities here. He was kind enough to come watch one of my son's soccer games before he even moved here, before he even had the job. So Sean and I have become very close, and his girlfriend and my wife, we get together when his girlfriend's in town and go out to dinner, and we've had Sean over for Super Bowls, and he's a great friend. I can't thank sports enough for introducing so many of my friends to me.
So when you guys get together, do you and Sean have an announce-off?
No, we actually...
There's no...
Yes, we watch our girlfriends coming, out of the restroom or from the bar area, and we see who can announce the other one better with the drink they're carrying or whatever it happens to be. No, when we get together, there might be a little shop talk, so to speak, but for the most part, it's just enjoying each other's company and having a drink or having dinner, or just catching up with his wife not living in Minnesota, or his girlfriend, that's my wife, it's his girlfriend, not living in Minnesota. I don't get to talk to her as much, and the first time I met her, she was a spectacular woman, so I hope that she ends up moving to Minnesota.
Now, the two of you, of course, have some common bonds in that both of you are public address announcers and you also have some broadcasting experience. I know Sean Parker called DC Divas games, and you mentioned getting to call Vixen Road games and the WFA Championship the last 2 seasons. What are the differences between public address announcing and play-by-play?
Public address announcing is mostly wait until after it happened and just recap. Whereas play-by-play is while it's happening. So, that's your biggest difference. Public address announcing, if you miss something, you don't necessarily have to say anything, and nobody's going to really think otherwise because you might have music playing, you might have something else going on the field, or a no huddle type situation in football, or an injury in a sport. Obviously, the public address announcer is quiet. In play-by-play, all those things, you're still talking. If they're in the huddle, you're talking. If there's an injury, you're talking. Just this past game in Golden, Colorado, there was an injured player, and we had to pretty much talk for 10, 15 minutes before ESPN finally said, okay, let's go to commercial. And so you're talking about, what are the players on the field thinking right now, or how are they feeling right now? What are we, can we see who this player is that's injured, and what can we say about this player? Do we have their stats? Do we have other information on them? Obviously you want to keep the watcher or the listener as calm as possible. You don't want to make any unjust assumptions about the injury. But in the same sense, you can't just sit there with the camera on the injured player and be quiet. So there has to be something spoken or said until they decide to go to break or the player gets back up.
And that's something I can attest to with my announcing experience, mostly at the high school level. I've done some small college work. When you go up to the larger levels, if you were to call an NFL game, you've got these packets, all of the guides, press releases, and you've got statisticians feeding you this information to help you kill dead air, is what we call it in the industry. I'm not sure what you have when you call it for ESPN3, but you're dealing with a league that doesn't have the same level of exposure, and these are all athletes who have regular jobs, and you've got to dig a little harder. So when you face that moment where you've got to wing it for 15 minutes like you did, what helps you get through a moment like that?
Well, the last 2 years in a row, I've been fortunate enough to work with Donna Wilkinson. She's done color analysts for both the games that I've done the play-by-play for. And if you look at my Twitter, you'll find a picture of the booth from this past year. And we literally had about 20 pieces of paper taped all over the windows and the walls that had stats and stories and records and all the information about these women that were down on the field. We were fortunate enough with the WFA that the league requires teams to upload stats to a website, hosted sports website. And so with the division championship games 2 weeks prior to the national championship game, it gave teams enough time to upload those stats for us to print them down and process them. But it also gave me time to reach out to the individual teams and said, hey, I'm going to be calling your game. Can you send me bios on your players? Can you send me information on your players? And the teams, they responded well and gave us that information. So we would have more than just went to this school, this is their name.
And you and I, yes, are connected in that way because I got the opportunity to call the women's football championship for 2 seasons. 1 year was Chicago, Boston and San Diego. That was when Whitney Zealy, I don't know if you know the name, that was a season where I think she came back after an injury and just destroyed everyone in the playoffs. And I think she holds the record for most yards, over 2,000. Then the next year, it was the first year of the DC-Dallas rivalry out in Los Angeles. And it may not be the most glamorous event in the sporting calendar, but what do you enjoy most about getting the chance to call that event for ESPN3?
I think what I enjoy most about calling that particular event is the opportunity to go into a city, which I normally don't go into a stadium, which even if I had been visiting that city, I probably definitely wouldn't have gone to, and getting to watch some great female athletes play their hearts out for a game that they absolutely love. I go into these games and there's these women that a lot of them started the tryout process in September, October the prior year. December, January, they were doing dry land practice or strength and conditioning practice. February, they started getting their plays and everything together. Beginning of April, boom, now they're playing games. Here's women that some of them are grandmothers, mothers, sisters, wives, partners, etc. We've got players that are in law enforcement. We've got lawyers. We've got doctors. We've got retail store clerks, officers. And so they've come from all these different backgrounds. They've got every ethnic representation there. You've got different hierarchies as far as economic, social class represented there, but they all come together on this field because they love to compete and they love the game of football. And that's the most exciting part for me, is just to give to these women something that they deserve.
I know one of my favorite moments was the year Boston won. I posted the post-game interview I had with a couple of their players, Allison Cahill, the quarterback, Whitney Zealy.
Still played this year, won again this year, number 7.
Oh, Cahill for Boston?
Yep.
Oh, with the Renegades now. That's
Yes.
right, because the militia disbanded and were reborn. The Boston Globe on their website featured my post-game video among the 9 sports moments you may have missed this year. That was a pretty cool moment. And it sounds like you've got the chance. Not many folks can say, I got to call the game for ESPN.
No, I mean, it is truly exciting. I know my mother's proud, because obviously when I went to Brown, it's not a cheap 2-year program by any means. It's closer to what some people pay for a 4-year degree at other schools. And, the first time when I did it, she's like, okay, you're finally putting that college education to use. It only took you a while.
It's funny how life works that way. You go to college for something and it can take a while for you to capitalize on that education.
Yeah, and I'm glad that I'm to the point now where I'm, again, not going to get rich. I'm not doing it to get rich. I'm doing it because I love working in sports. I love attending sporting events, and I love being able to take the talent that I have and give it to these athletes who are showing their talents for everybody to see.
Now, I got my chance to call the WFA championship. I covered the now defunct Minnesota Machine for some time and was able to get in touch with their league's owner, Lisa King. How did you get the call to be a part of the WFA festivities?
For last year, it was the Minnesota Vixen were on a roll last season. They were having a really good season. And Lisa King shot me an email that basically said, hey, looks like the Vixen are going to make it all the way to the championship game this season. Would you be interested in coming out and doing this for us? And of course, you don't say no when the commissioner calls, right?
Right. So if Roger Goodell ever calls you up, you're going to say yes to whatever he asks you?
I'd be more than happy to work right alongside Joe Buck.
And how long did it take for you to think about that decision?
Let's put it this way. I already had tickets booked to fly to Florida with my family the Sunday after the game from Minnesota. Once I got the call, I was already online figuring out, okay, how can I change that flight to leave from Atlanta to Orlando instead of Minneapolis to Orlando? So it did not take long at all.
No, and I'm glad you've got the chance to witness those championships. And when you said the Vixen made that deep run, they did go all the way in the Division II championship that season. Came up short. I believe it was New York.
By a touchdown. Nope, yep, New York Wolves. Or excuse me,
Wolves,
New York Sharks. They're the Wolves
team
this year.
They beat, okay, so they're the Wolves. And kind of a bit of irony or coincidence, because it was the Vixen in the old IWFL who beat the Sharks to go to the championship in that series. So you got to see a little rivalry play out there.
Little rivalry. There's quite a bit of that in the women's football realm, which makes it exciting. It's no different than watching the Vikings play the Packers or the Broncos play the Raiders. You get these rivalries that grow. You got the Eagles and the Cowboys. They butt heads. I mean, the Vixen, I'd say, their biggest is, they got Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City
Titans.
Titans, thank you. The Titans,
I do not.
who they play.
I don't think Vixen are good, but I'm not sure they want to face Patrick Mahomes.
It depends on the season the Chiefs are having.
Oh, that's true. They had a good one last year, but the Titans. I called that Vixen Titans game last season, and those two, whenever they meet, as you said, they're always down to the wire games.
Yeah, they're very exciting games, and they're great to be a part of. So then this year, I obviously reached out to Lisa, and I said I would love the opportunity to come back and do this again, regardless of who's playing in the game. And she took me up on it, thankfully. And now in December, this is not officially public yet, but we might as well make it public right now.
It sounds like you're going that way.
In December, I will be doing the public address announcing for the Women's Football Hall of Fame game in Las Vegas, Nevada, which will be the first weekend in December this year. And this will be the second year that they're having that game.
The perfect time to go to Las Vegas, too, in December.
Agreed.
That is really cool. So what is the Hall of Fame game, just for those who aren't aware about it?
The Women's Football Hall of Fame game was actually started last year. And what they did was a person and a group, they basically looked at all the women that have played professional semi-pro football in the United States over the years. And they said, okay, men have their Hall of Fame for the NFL. Let's begin to have our own for these women. When we've got women like Michelle Brown that played for 20 seasons before she retired. Cynthia Red Bryant has just finished her 21st season. And so they've looked at women like this. Donna Wilkinson actually was elected into the Hall of Fame as well. Used to play for the DC Divas. So they said, okay, let's pick so many of these women. Let's gather them together from across the country and let's recognize them for what they've done for the sport of women's football. So that's what that is. And they're going to have a second game this year. They're still deciding who the inductees will be this year. So that information probably will come out end of October, beginning of November, I would believe.
So you've heard the official report. Check him out in Las Vegas in December. Now, you mentioned you also have done some color commentary. Actually, this was your first season, I believe, doing any kind of color work. So what led you and Alex Westad to team up, and what led Town Square to decide to broadcast Vixen road games? Because, televising home games, that's a big deal. Having the road games, I don't think any other team, if there are any, have that arrangement.
Yeah, back in 2015, 2014, James and Laura Brown took over the team. And in 2015, they reached out to Town Square Television because they were playing locally in Town Square's backyard, that they wanted to start broadcasting their home games. And so they worked out an agreement with Town Square where Town Square would come and broadcast the 4 home games. And then they did that for a couple years. This past fall, so almost a year ago now, Tom Ritchie of Ritchie Media Group reached out to myself and asked, how do I get a hold of the owners of the Vixen? And I said, why? I was like the gatekeeper, so to speak. So we had a couple meetings. Tom presented us with a Blue Frame Technologies package where he was able to broadcast games using cameras and a laptop and use swipes and graphics and fades and everything else, and all those things that went over our heads right away. When
Valley Access Channels has that set up for their games. I know because I call their Stillwater broadcasts. But continue this story. You had the Blue Frame Technology.
Yeah, so we met a few times at a local restaurant, and Tom said, this is what I'd like to do. And he approached Town Square. They were able to get some sponsorships available, and then it happened. For the home games, Sean Parker was doing play-by-play. Kelly Schultz, who's the play-by-play for the Minnesota Whitecaps, came on to do color commentary for the home games for the Minnesota Vixen. Road games, we wanted to mix it up a little bit, give something else. So Alex Westad, who I believe works for...
SEC.
Thank you. I knew the letters, didn't know what it stood for.
We've called some games together, and he also does some of your work with Hill Murray, so I'm well aware of him. So you and Alex, how did you two team up?
We met the first time an hour before we went on the air in Kansas City. And Alex and I, we just synced right away. We had a great opportunity to where he could do the play-by-play, I could do the color commentary. And I think the reason that I was brought in to do the color commentary this season for the Vixen is I've known those women for all these years and those players, and I have this background where I know the Women's Football Alliance and what it takes and what these women do week in and week out. So whereas Alex could use his skills as a play-by-play announcer, I could, give all my knowledge on the backside of what was going on and why things happened. And because when the players are at home, obviously their loved ones are coming to the game. When they're on the road, it's a little bit harder to travel. Not everybody wants to make the 8.5-hour drive to St. Louis to watch a 2.5-hour football game. So by Alex and I going down there and broadcasting those games, it allowed the people up at home, or whether anywhere around the country for that matter, to watch the games.
And as I understand it, over these last several years, covering the Vixen is something of a family affair because you have someone close to your family who is the team photographer?
My wife, Alana, is the team photographer. I think this was her 4th season doing that. It was my 5th announcing, so I think it was her 3rd or 4th. And then on the road games, my son Logan was one of the camera operators this year as well. So he operated camera both times in St. Louis and out in Milwaukee. So we're kind of adding more and more family into it, which a lot of the Vixen is. You look at the water boys on the field, they're children of a couple of the coaches. You look at the ticket takers, you look at who's running the merchandise stands. It's a lot of family involvement.
So what started as a way to maybe follow your kids as they grew up playing sports is turning into this growing list of opportunity as a public address announcer. Did you see yourself 5 years ago going from Simley High School to having at least 2 colleges, being a number 2 for Golden Gophers hockey, and being the lead voice of the WFA championship?
No idea. No, I didn't. But if anything, what it's taught me, and that what I've made sure to instill into my kids is, no matter what you do in college and no matter where you're at right now, if you have a dream out there or you have an ambition to do something, don't stop chasing it. Keep going for it. Keep reaching for it, because, there's no limit to what you can achieve.
Now, change gears a little bit here. What was the most frustrating moment you've had as an announcer? Because I imagine in your case, if a team doesn't get their lineup to you in time, or if a team doesn't reply back to send you the information you need to call a game, what were some moments that, I don't want to say made you quit, but maybe had you fuming for a moment or two?
Let's see. Well, there was an event. I'm not going to narrow it down too much because I don't want to make anybody upset. It was an event.
It's not the names, it's the principle that we're looking for.
I think it was event number 314. If somebody wants
so if you want to look it up, find 314.
Where I had a person related to a player go to me in the box where I was working and demand that their family member got more playing time. And they felt that because I was wearing a headset mic, because when I'm doing a lot of my sports I wear a headset mic, that I was in direct communication with the coach who was also wearing a headset mic. To the point where he started to get graphic with the words that he used and things of that nature, but yeah.
So words you couldn't repeat on the air here.
No.
That is a strange story that someone thought it's like, do they not notice you're in front of a mic or you're in front of this board that you don't have any connection whatsoever to the coaches?
Yeah, you never know what people think in the heat of the moment.
Now, as frustrating as that was for you, this next season, I'm not sure when it will be, but you will call your 500th game. You told me you were at 478?
Yeah, I think I could pull out my phone and look at my spreadsheet. The nerd in me has it figured out. Depending upon...
Be cool to nerds. We might work for one, right?
That's right. Depending upon how JV varsity hockey games fall into place, because not every school has both JV and varsity, 500 should be right in the middle of November someplace.
How would you say you have grown as an announcer from event number 1 to event number 500, whenever that is?
Event number 1, I wanted to get in and get it done. Event number 500, I want to get in and get it done right.
And for you, what does that say about your growth? This call up, sure, let's give this a shot. This thing you tried out is turned into something where you're going to call 500 events soon. I don't know how many announcers can say they've been on hand to witness 500 sporting events in just 5 years.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, like I said, the first season when it was just hockey, and then you slowly add, and everything kind of keeps snowballing. I think that's one reason that I said no more high school soccer is the snowball gets too big, you get buried in the avalanche, and I don't want that to happen. I want to still enjoy it. I want to still have it be fun. So I'm looking at looking at going into this 500th, and I'm looking at all the things that I still want to get, all the things that I still want to do. There's things that I would like to achieve that are out of my control. There are people that I'd like to still network with. There are still players that I'd like to say, I would love the opportunity to go, watch Michael Busch play in the World Series someday and just be able to say, I called it, There's those types of things that are still down the horizon a ways. They're not going to happen tomorrow. And because of that, it's not where you can just hang up your hat. I don't see myself hanging up my hat anytime soon.
I don't think the Vixen would let you.
No. I did give a couple ultimatums to the hockey program at the high school. I said 10 years or you win a state title. That's where my cutoff is. So this will be season 6. So we're only halfway through, so they've got time. I look at things like that, and you don't necessarily want to step away, and that's why I keep adding things to make it more fun for myself. Whether it's interjecting certain music or allowing the baseball team to all have their own walk-up songs. Those things that you see it in the pro, you don't see it in high school. Where do I see it going? I don't know. It's still going, and I want to keep it going for a long time. I was fortunate enough to take over the football program at Simley High School from somebody that had announced it for 27 years. Whether or not I have 27 years in me, we'll have to see.
And on that note, what goals do you have moving forward with this public address announcing and just broadcasting in general, this venture of yours?
There's a couple things locally that I would, if I got those, I would consider those, the epitome of what I want. There's one that's going to be opening up next summer nearby that hasn't been there before, that I've already contacted and said I'm interested in this role. There's one out west that I've already contacted and said I would be interested in this role. The roles that I'm truly interested in and that I would consider, okay, I've reached my goal, my end goal. They know I want those. 2 of those 3 don't exist yet. So it's not like I'm going to be taking over for anybody. So they'd kind of be mine to mold, which I think would be a lot of fun. That is one of the things that I've enjoyed about doing Simley baseball is prior to myself last season, all they had was a parent volunteer or a student volunteer. So it was kind of mine to mold, which makes it fun. It allows your creativity to flow beyond just what you're saying over the microphone. There are a few awards that I think it would be cool to win. Not very easy to get, but they do exist for public address announcers out there. I just kind of keep doing what I'm doing, and it's not like an athlete where I can go to the gym and get stronger and faster. For me, it's reading out loud a lot. When I'm reading something on Twitter, I find myself reading it out loud just so I can hear how it's coming out of my mouth.
I do the same thing when I'm watching broadcasts. I go into that broadcasting mode and I'm calling plays for a few seconds and I have to remind myself, you're just watching the game, but it's hard not to pay attention to that when you experience it. Now I have to ask you, are one of those goals would be one of them, does that involve being maybe a number 2 guy for Sean Parker if he can't make a Wolves game?
I love Sean. Sean and I have a unwritten gentleman's agreement. I will never go after a basketball role. He will never go after a hockey role.
So the two of you, you know your domains and you like to
Everything
keep it
else is free game, but he won't go after hockey. I won't go after basketball.
I'd say that agreement has a good chance of holding up. And of course, not only can we look forward to hearing your voice at sporting events, you also do some radio with Super
Radio USA.
Radio, yes.
Yep. Super Radio
Every
USA.
Saturday, right?
Saturday and Sundays. I used to be 6 a.m. to noon. Now I'm noon to 6 p.m. So I have a much better shift. Hopefully that'll increase my listenership. It's an app you can download on your phone, whether it's an Android phone or an Apple phone. It's Android Auto, Apple Auto, Google CarPlay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get all those straight. There's the acronyms. And they've got some exciting things coming down the pipe. But basically there are a number of stations that you can download, from Euro Jazz to classic country. I happen to work for Hot Rock and USA, so anybody likes the good 80s and 90s rock and roll, whether it's Warrant or Cheap Trick or Motley Crue or Metallica or the Allman Brothers Band or Bon Jovi, they kind of play all that. So I happen to be the age of their key demographics, so it works out well.
It just fit right in then.
Yep, and anybody locally that grew up in this area can remember Hot Rockin' 104 KJJO from the 80s. Our music director is the music director from that station, so that'll kind of give them an idea what they can expect to hear.
So whether you are a music fan or a sports fan, this guy, the Minnesota Announcer Guy, which I think is a fitting Twitter handle, and no matter how famous
Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Right.
I got it on all three.
So no matter how famous you might get, or your friendly rivals, we'll call it that, you always will be known as the Minnesota Announcer Guy. That's not something anyone else can claim. You've got it, and I imagine it would take a pretty good offer for you to give that up.
Nah, I still wouldn't.
So you'll just have to be Minnesota Announcer Guy A for anyone else that wants it. Well, Brian, thanks for taking the time to share some insights on what it's like to be a public address announcer. And who knows, this year 500, another few years, maybe 1,000. And if you end up at some big wig event, I will definitely be tuning in to listen to your voice, because there's another internet friend of mine who does the same thing out in San Diego, and it's cool to see the differences between the broadcasting side and PA announcing, and you've got a chance to work both, which not many folks have.
It's different. I mean, from public address to color commentary to play-by-play to doing the radio thing, it's 4 different animals. And so it does take some being prepared mentally to make sure you know which one you're doing at that time.
Yeah, you kind of have the quadrant of broadcasting covered at the local level, and who knows, it could expand to national. I mean, you already had a taste of that, and I'm really excited to hear what opportunities are coming your way.
Thank you.
So once again, you can follow him on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Twitter, MN Announcer Guy, Instagram, MN Announcer Guy, and Facebook, he's just the Announcer Guy. You sense a theme here, folks? So it's Simley, Eastridge, Concordia, St. Thomas, anywhere in the metro, there's a chance you'll hear his voice. And again, Super Radio USA on the weekends from noon to 6 if you're a big fan of 80s and 90s rock. Once again, Brian Sweeney. And if you'd like to be a future guest on an episode of Mic'd Up Sports, contact us at tsbtelevision@gmail.com. As we said at the start of the show, you can be a coach, a player, a trainer, an announcer like Brian. If you have a background in sports, we'd love to hear your story. For our crew, I'm Mike Peden. Thanks for watching Mic'd Up Sports.
If you'd like to support TSB Television sports programming, check us out at patreon.com/tsbtelevision or paypal.me/tsbtelevision.